Welcome, I am Ramesh Ramachandran.
And I'm Mark Lynn, and it's just after 6:10 p.m. in New Delhi, and that's 12:40 GMT, and you're watching continuing coverage of the 18th G20 Summit here on DD India.
That's right, if you're just tuning in, the G20 Summit is well and truly on in New Delhi. A brand new state-of-the-art convention center in the heart of the Indian capital is the venue of the summit.
In fact, one big takeaway or outcome from day one of the summit is that the African Union has been invited as the 21st member of the G20.
And after the first session in the morning on the theme of One Earth, and the second session in the afternoon on the theme of One Family, next on the G20 leaders' itinerary is a gala dinner.
Indeed. The President of India, Draupadi Murmu, will host the participating leaders and their partners for dinner at the Bharat Mandapam in just a short while from now.
All right, so that in a nutshell is all that's taken place in the last several hours at the 18th G20 Summit in New Delhi. We'll get you the latest from our full complement of reporters at the venue. We'll also be joined by our guests who will put the summit in its proper context for you, the viewer.
And all that and more coming up in just a bit. But first, a look at the headlines that we are tracking at this hour.
G20 Summit adopts the New Delhi Leaders Declaration. Host India succeeds in getting consensus.
Global Biofuel Alliance launched under India's G20 presidency on the sidelines of the G20 Leaders Summit.
African Union becomes a G20 member. The 55-nation bloc joins as a permanent member at the New Delhi Summit.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi hosts bilateral meetings with his British and Japanese counterparts on the sidelines of the G20 Summit.
And a powerful earthquake of magnitude 6.8 strikes Morocco, claims at least 820 lives, injures more than 600.
The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has announced that the New Delhi Leaders Declaration has been adopted by all members. And the language, in fact, of this declaration addresses climate change. It urges the rich countries to fulfill their existing commitments to help those nations more vulnerable.
It also urges countries to refrain from the use of force to seize territories in reference to Ukraine, but with no mention of Russia. But it does call on Russia and Ukraine to ensure the delivery of grain and fertilizers from the region, emphasizing the importance of food and energy security.
हमारी टीम्स के हार्ड वर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मेरा प्रस्ताव है कि इस लीडर्स डिक्लेरेशन को भी एडॉप्ट किया जाए। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं।
And India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, has said that the G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration, what does it do? It focuses on promoting strong, sustainable, balanced and inclusive growth. It seeks to accelerate progress on sustainable development goals and has come up with an action plan accordingly.
The declaration that the leaders have agreed on today focuses on promoting strong, sustainable, balanced and inclusive growth. It seeks to accelerate progress on SDGs and has come up with an action plan accordingly. It envisages a Green Development Pact for a sustainable future. It endorses high-level principles on lifestyle for sustainable development, voluntary principles on hydrogen, the Chennai Principles for a Sustainable and Resilient Blue Economy, and the Deccan Principles on food security and nutrition, among others.
Minister Jaishankar also spoke on the African Union becoming a permanent G20 member during India's presidency.
It is a matter of particular satisfaction for us that the African Union has this morning become a permanent member of the G20, that too during the Indian presidency. This is in keeping with the priority that we attach to addressing the urgent concerns of the Global South. You would recall that at the beginning of our presidency, Prime Minister Modi's initiative, 125 nations were consulted to express the voice of the Global South.
And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched the much-anticipated Global Biofuels Alliance at the G20 summit on Saturday. Set up at par with the International Solar Alliance, this biofuel alliance, it focuses on accelerated adoption of biofuels.
To support respective net zero targets, to solve the energy quadrilemma, to strengthen circular economy, and provide cost-effective and environmentally favorable alternative. Global sustainable biofuels production needs to triple by 2030. Therefore, joint action through the Global Biofuels Alliance with multi-stakeholder support spanning 19 countries and 12 international organizations will identify.
Meanwhile, India and the US co-chaired a partnership for global infrastructure and investment and the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. It will be a medium for economic integration with West Asia and Europe. And Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi said through this initiative, global South nations will get a boost in several sectors.
ग्लोबल साउथ के अनेक देशों में एक विश्वसनीय पार्टनर के रूप में एनर्जी, रेलवे, वाटर, टेक्नोलॉजी पार्क्स जैसे क्षेत्रों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर प्रोजेक्ट्स इंप्लीमेंट किए हैं। इन प्रयासों में हमने डिमांड ड्रिवन और ट्रांसपेरेंट अप्रोच पर विशेष रूप से बल दिया है। पीजीआईआई के माध्यम से हम ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों में इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर गैप को कम करने में महत्वपूर्ण योगदान दे सकते हैं।
And Prime Minister Narendra Modi also said that connectivity is one of the most important pillars, adding that financial viability should be the focus rather than debt burden.
कनेक्टिविटी इनिशिएटिव्स को प्रमोट करते हुए कुछ मूलभूत सिद्धांतों का सुनिश्चित किया जाना महत्वपूर्ण है। डेट बर्डन की जगह फाइनेंशियल वायबिलिटी को बढ़ावा देना और पर्यावरण के सभी मापदंडों का पालन करना। आज जब हम कनेक्टिविटी का इतना बड़ा इनिशिएटिव ले रहे हैं, तब हम आने वाली पीढ़ियों के सपनों के विस्तार के बीज बो रहे हैं।
And US President Joe Biden said that the economic corridor will work on strengthening ships, railway network, and members will continue to make Middle East more prosperous and integrated.
Today, I'm proud to announce that we've finalized a historic agreement for a new India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. As a key part of this corridor, we're going to invest in ships and rail that extends from India all the way to Europe, connected by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. Bridging ports across 2 continents, unlocking endless opportunities, including making it far easier to trade, export clean energy, expand access to reliable, clean electricity, lay cables that will connect communities and secure a stable internet, contributing to a more stable, more prosperous, and integrated Middle East.
And our colleague Amritpal Singh now joins us from the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi, which is the venue of the G20 summit. Amritpal, what does the text of the declaration say?
Well, the text, it is a long text, and it speaks on a variety of issues. Essentially, if you look at the heart of the Delhi Declaration, it is, as they've been consistently saying, it adopts a very human-centric approach. Now, coming to the specifics, for example, on Ukraine, it says, let us respect the UN resolutions. They said what was agreed upon at Bali was built upon UN resolutions on that, respecting the UN resolutions on that, calling for territorial integrity of the country, not violating sovereignty. So that is what it says on the Ukraine issue. Thus it speaks on a variety of issues. In fact, I have with me Shriram Cholya. Shriram, how do you, Ramesh is asking, what does, if you were to first put what does the Delhi Declaration, what's the message that it sends out, and then we could specifically discuss what does the text of it say.
Amrit, I would say the big message is we are one world, one family, one earth. We have really, one future, and we are working towards one future. I think by achieving the agreement in such a super fast manner and so efficiently, like a machine, our diplomatic, paraphernalia worked to perfection and made sure that we got this outcome on day one of the summit itself. I think that in itself, and then of course the admission of the African Union as a full member.
But isn't that unusual? Is that usual to get?
It is unusual.
Okay.
Multilateral summits nowadays, especially where there are countries with very, very different
viewpoints, deep divisions, like on the Ukraine issue.
Yeah, which are at different ends of the geopolitical spectrum. Usually it goes down to the wire. 11th hour, last minute negotiations, frantic parleying between different parties, suspense, uncertainty. That's what happened in Bali, in Indonesia last year. But this time, I think, we pulled off a coup because we are so organized, so prepared. We had our lines and our channels with all the players, and we realized early on where the gaps were, and we worked very hard on resolving them. And, hard work pays off, and it's success because we have been able to use India's weight as a rising power. You see, if this were another country, I mean, G20, all of them are so-called emerging and advanced countries, but there are some which have got weaker diplomatic capital. I don't want to name them, but I'm simply saying that had 2023 not been India's year of presidency, we may have really struggled given the overall climate. But because it's India, and because we have that gravitas, because we got the diplomatic capital, because we have that ability to bring so many parties to the table and to say yes, because we have done quid pro quos with all of them, because we are announcing so many strategic partnerships with so many G20 countries, for them there's no way they can try to play spoil sport with India, And what we are saying is, in a way, in a folksy way, if I were to put it, don't mess with us. We are here for the whole of humanity. And if any one of you believes that you have an agenda, you have a vested interest, keep that aside, because India is now leading and you cannot say no to us. So I think that's the ultimate message, that our persuasion, our ability to take along so many countries and to be able to demonstrate our leadership on the world stage, we have achieved that.
All right. And, okay, let's come to the specifics. On Ukraine, how was the deal achieved? Because given the divisions run so deep, President Putin chose not to come. In fact, President Xi chose not to come. He sent his premier. So how did you achieve what you achieved on Ukraine? And given, violating, not violating, respecting territorial integrity, etc., seemingly the Russians should have a problem with that. How did they agree to it?
See, the wording can be interpreted differently. I mean, the Russians can say that nobody condemned us explicitly. The Western powers and the Ukrainians and others can say that UN Charter, respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity is an implicit criticism of Russia. This is not an era of war. Prime Minister's phrases again come in the declaration. and we can say that, look, the voice of the South also came through. So look at it, there are like so many
Factors
angles.
at play here.
Yeah, and all of them got something out of it. And that is the art of multilateral diplomacy. And even with the wording, there is a phrase in the declaration that says that there are different assessments and views on the situation. About the war in Ukraine. In other words, what we are saying is, yes, there are differences, but that doesn't mean there's no declaration, right? So we've managed to accommodate those differences with carefully phrasing through diplomatics.
And I think, Ramesh, one important point which both the External Affairs Minister and the Sherpa were at pains to explain in their press conference was that we got the so-called emerging economies or the global South to say that, look, what a crisis of not our making is affecting us the most. It is the most vulnerable parts of the parts of population that are getting affected, which live in the developing or the underdeveloped world, and that also created a certain amount of pressure on the parties to say that, look, you may have your interests clashing here, but the after effects are seen on the humanity which is paying for no fault of theirs.
All right, Amrit, thank you, and do thank Professor Cholia on our behalf as well. All right, Mark, joining us now is Dr. Mohan Kumar. Dr. Kumar is a former Indian ambassador to France and Bahrain. And also joining us is Dr. Arunabh Ghosh. He is the founder of Council on Energy, Environment and Water. He joins us from New Delhi. Dr. Kumar, if I can start with you, some would say India pulled off the impossible by getting the G20 to adopt by consensus the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration. What did you make of the text of the declaration, and why don't you put the text in its proper context for our viewers as well?
Thank you for having me. I think there is little doubt in my mind that this was a brilliant master stroke. I tend to give credit, of course, to the Prime Minister's guidance, but in particular to the ability of being a wordsmith, the External Affairs Minister, because the paragraphs on Ukraine threatened a consensus. And I think what they have done is an age-old wisdom of Indian diplomacy, which is you create words literally out of nothing so that Sergei Lavrov can go back to his boss and tell him in Moscow that I saved your face. The Chinese Prime Minister can go and say I protected my interests. The Western countries can say that, listen, we were able to get a paragraph or 3 paragraphs on Ukraine in an institution or organization that is purely geo-economic. So every side has something in it for itself. The Bali Declaration on Ukraine was an aberration where we explicitly condemned Russia. Everybody condemned Russia explicitly. In any other country, Sergei Lavrov would have lost his job, but Russia is Russia, so I will not dwell too much into it. This, I think, is an accurate, transparent description of the situation. They are mentioning the UN resolutions, the UN Security Council resolutions, and then saying that these were the countries reiterated their national positions. And even on the impact of the war in Ukraine, they are saying there were different assessments and different inferences. So that's being honest. And it is remarkable that that was accepted by everybody. There is no footnote, which is interesting and important because even Bali had a footnote. When it came to debt, there was a footnote which said one country dissociated itself. That was China. So there is no question that this is India's shining moment. It's a declaration without brackets, without footnote, without patience.
Let me bring in Let me bring in Dr. Ghosh as well into the discussion. Dr. Ghosh, as we look at those 83 points of this declaration, a lot of it focuses on health as well as the environment. As an environmentalist, how would you look at that, when we look at one Earth, one family, and importantly, one future?
I think this is an extraordinary leaders' declaration wherein within the declaration you have a dedicated green development pact. This is what India has been pushing for many months, and I'm delighted that this has come true, and I certainly congratulate the Indian presidency and all our diplomatic officers who have put so much effort into getting it there. Now, why is this important? It's important because, as the Prime Minister has also mentioned, this has to be a people-centric G20 presidency, but that is also aligned with the needs of the planet. Balancing these two critical issues, the people-centrism and the planetary sustainability, is what comes together in this Green Development Pact. Look at it in this way. Number one, there is this incredible focus on sustainable consumption. It is the G20 presidency and the leaders' declaration is now holding a mirror to ourselves in terms of our own lifestyles, this high-level principles and lifestyles for sustainable development, which is then linked to the enabling of billions of dollars of a circular economy. Secondly, it is focusing on a just energy transition that is people-centric. So it's trying to bring the energy transition closer to people, closer to the geographies where sustainable infrastructure is needed. We've just created the Global Biofuels Alliance on the back of the International Solar Alliance that India and France created a few years ago. And there is also a focus on a rules-based order for green hydrogen, including a Green Hydrogen Innovation Center. On top of that, India brings climate finance and sustainable finance together and takes this conversation from billions to the trillions. These are fundamental building blocks for why this Green Development Pact is not just about development, but is also green, but is a
Dr. Ghosh, and Dr. Kumar, may I request you to please stay on. I'll come back to you momentarily. But Mark, we have some more news coming our viewers' way.
As well. I mean, other news apart from the G20, you know, a powerful earthquake has killed over 800 people and destroyed hundreds of buildings in Morocco. The quake of magnitude 7, according to the Interior Ministry of Morocco, was most strongly felt near the city of Marrakesh.
A massive quake struck Morocco late on Friday, sending terrified residents fleeing from their homes in the middle of the night. Several buildings collapsed and the rubble fell onto the road, smashing up cars.
A 7-magnitude earthquake was recorded on Friday night, September 8 at around 11 p.m. Its epicenter was located in Igil.
Strong tremors were also felt in other cities. People were too afraid to go.
I thought it was a cat, but it was not. Then I heard of people screaming and I realized that it is an earthquake, and I told my family to leave the house.
Victims had horrific tales of what happened when the quake first struck.
The room started shaking, there's no other way. We was going backwards and forwards and everything started moving and pictures started moving, and so we just grabbed some clothes and our bags and we raced out.
Meanwhile, Morocco's civil protection forces gathered truckloads of supplies to be sent to quake zones on Saturday morning. An official said most of the deaths were in the high Atlas mountain areas that are harder to reach. During opening remarks for the G20 summit in New Delhi, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi offered to help.
मैं अपनी हार्दिक संवेदना प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। हम प्रार्थना करते हैं कि सभी इंजर्ड लोग शीघ्र स्वस्थ हो। इस कठिन समय में पूरा विश्व समुदाय मोरक्को के साथ है और हम उन्हें हर संभव सहायता पहुंचाने के लिए तैयार हैं।
As night turned to day, the true toll of the quake became clear. This is the country's deadliest tremor in more than 6 decades. Amit Mukherjee reports for DD India.
And Caroline Holt, Global Head of Disaster Operations for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, joins us from Geneva. Caroline, what's the latest information about the earthquake and its aftermath that you can share with us?
Thank you for inviting me to speak. The latest that we know, as your pictures also suggest, as daylight came, of course, because this happened in the dark hours in the night, it really started to unfold the size and the magnitude and really the damage that had been caused on this. There's a lot of confusion, as you can imagine, in terms of just coming to terms with the shock of what's happened. There are a lot of people impacted, a lot of people living outside or moving out of their homes and their buildings because, of course, their fear and the very real fear of aftershocks that might come. So we know that death toll is now more than 800 people, unfortunately, and we offer our sincere condolences, of course, to all of those affected. But we're working very closely with the Moroccan Red Crescent, with our partners on the ground, and also with the government and with the agencies to really try to understand and assess the needs. These are critical hours, but it's still very early days.
You say that the number of injured or the number of, there are more than 800 people who are dead. But, is that figure likely to rise given the fact that this has been the strongest earthquake in 100 years? And what's being done actually for those who are injured?
Very sadly, that figure is definitely likely to rise, I'm sad to say. It's a case at the minute of the search and rescue phase is very much underway and really trying to find those that are stuck under the rubble. We also know that there are some very remote places that have been impacted. So I would suggest that we can't even start to identify really the full toll of this particular earthquake, and no doubt some very sad news that will come through in the coming days. But that search and rescue phase is really a critical phase, and we see a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration from those stories. Unfortunately, we have a lot of experience, of course, in earthquakes, and that's generally the pattern. The next 3-4 days will be critical to save as many lives as possible. And as you say, there are a lot of people that have been injured and that have survived this. And our attention must also be on really providing them with basic needs support to make sure that they are, first of all, safe. There's a lot of psychosocial and mental health needs of this. You can imagine that people are living in a very clear state of fear, and really supporting those people and helping them to understand the trauma of what's happened, but also the very practical measures around first aid. There are a lot of injuries. When we see earthquakes and we see earthquake damage, there are a lot of broken bones, and there are a lot of people who have sustained injuries as a consequence, a direct consequence of this disaster. Mm-hmm. So we're also supporting the government with transporting those people to hospital, making sure that they're receiving the appropriate medical health care where they can. As many people as possible are being supported with first aid where they are, with certainly through the Moroccan Red Crescent, but no doubt with other agencies, and the Ministry of Interior and the Civil Defence Forces on the ground. But really, it's all hands to the pump at a time like this, just to make sure that those who survive are also put in the best possible situation for their continued survival. And we're really supporting them with food, with clean water. These will be critical things in the coming days. And of course, shelter, because these people are outside of their homes and exposed to the elements, whether that be the weather, whether that be animals. We need to make sure that people actually have a safe space available to them.
Caroline, talking about the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, we're given to understand that the Red Cross and Red Crescent teams are on the ground. What are they telling you?
Exactly. We have presence of Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies in 191 countries globally. So certainly the Moroccan Red Crescent are playing a critical role here. Let's also remember that the people who work with the Moroccan Red Crescent are also members of the community themselves. Many of them will also have been impacted by this disaster. So they are on the ground, they are working with their neighbours and their communities, and they are supporting the government with this very critical search and rescue phase. We can see there the pictures and the images of communities and support really stepping in and assisting. We're also working with the Moroccan Red Crescent to get access to those hard to reach places. Transportation routes are down because we know that transport routes and roads have been damaged. Communication links have also been impacted. So getting access to the people in the more remote places is also difficult. At times like this, electricity is also down. We know that basic infrastructure is impacted, and it's really allowing or supporting the Moroccan Red Crescent to really support on the needs assessments, trying to identify where the worst impacted places are and what the worst and most prioritized needs are at this point is critical.
Indeed, and what kind of immediate or long-term help will be required?
In the immediate term, as I say, it's moving people away from damaged buildings because, of course, there's a very real risk of aftershock, which creates uncertainty in these times. So really making sure that people are away from those spaces and in a safe place, but also that they have access to clean and safe water, that they have access to food, and as they enter now their one of the first night, I guess, outside in the open, that they really have access to shelter in whatever form that comes at the minute. The international and the Moroccan government, of course, are really supporting on those needs. Keeping people alive in the initial stages is really what's important, and making sure that there is support for those most seriously injured. And then in the longer term, again, we've seen this before, it will be about making sure that people have shelter, that they have sustainable shelter, that they have access to their livelihoods again, of course, because people's lives are fundamentally changed in an event of this size. So the longer term needs, of course, will be making sure that people do have access to what they need to start to really regain. But this is a marathon, absolutely. This is not a sprint. And we can expect that there will be a call for support, and the needs will go on for the days, weeks, months and years ahead, no doubt, as Morocco starts to rebuild.
Caroline, thank you. And we still have with us our guest, but before that, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, during the media briefing on the G20 summit in New Delhi, said that many action-oriented outcomes of his presidency contain a comprehensive strategy that caters to the unique needs and aspirations of all developing nations.
Through well-curated debates and careful assimilation of all the perspectives, the Indian presidency has crafted solutions that resonate with each member, offering a shared path forward for all. Many action-oriented outcomes of this presidency contain comprehensive strategies that cater to the unique needs and aspirations of all developing nations.
And Sitharaman also said that better, bigger and effective multilateral development banks will contribute to enhancing representation of the voice of developing nations in decision-making.
With you just some of the key achievements of the Indian presidency, the finance track. First one is the outcomes which are focused on strengthening the MDBs to address shared global challenges of the 21st century. So under this strengthening MDBs, there are 4 key highlights that I'd like to bring to your notice. The first one is agreement on the need for a better, bigger, and more effective MDBs. It is so necessary to have better, bigger, and more effective MDBs because the developmental demands from all across the globe is so high, these institutions will have to be better and bigger. This is also going to contribute to enhancing representation and voice of developing countries in the decision making.
Let's go back to our guest on this special broadcast, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. Ambassador Kumar, you described the declaration as a shining moment for India and Indian diplomacy as that. But I have to ask you this. India's Sherpa Amitabh Kant said on Twitter, now X, that there was, I quote, 100% consensus on all developmental and geopolitical issues. I'm sure you've taken part in a number of such negotiations in the past. What would have gone into forging a consensus on some contentious issues that we've spoken about, including, for instance, Ambassador Kumar, if I can go through the operative part of the declaration. It uses the word war instead of conflict, for one, and two, it reiterates Prime Minister Modi's formulation of today's era must not be of war.
So, Ramesh, I think on Ukraine, it has to be said that the Bali declaration was an aberration that talked of Russian aggression. Now, all that is gone. And I think as the External Affairs Minister said correctly, what they've tried to do is reflect the positions of different countries honestly and dispassionately. So if you see the language, they are talking about national positions which have been reiterated in the case of UN resolutions and Security Council observations. Secondly, it has also been said that even with regard to the impact of the war in Ukraine on things like food, fuel, and fertilizer, the declaration acknowledges that there are different perspectives and different views. So that's a very transparent way of accepting that, okay, we are a bunch of 20 countries, but we have different views. I think, as I said earlier, each country can actually draw something from the declaration. I think that is the greatness of this declaration. On the rest of the declaration, which has to do with sustainable development goals, climate change, reform of multilateral banks, food security, I think the outcome is absolutely remarkable. It ticks all the boxes. If you take sustainable development goals, for example, it acknowledges that SDGs have not been achieved by the lower income countries, and therefore it decides to accelerate the achievement of SDGs. So how do you do it? You have to go to the finance track to get an answer. The finance track talks of multilateral development banks having to be recapitalized, need for a public-private sector partnership. You need funds if you have to achieve sustainable development goal. Climate, I will leave it to my illustrious colleague, Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, but on the other issues, namely food security, for example, there is actually high principles of food security which were adopted. Similarly, I think you have things with regard to green hydrogen, biofuels. There have been some principles which have been accepted. I will finish by talking about one concrete achievement, and that is digital public infrastructure. As the External Affairs Minister and the Sherpas said, there was not even an acceptance of a definition of digital public infrastructure. If there is one shining outcome of this declaration, which is concrete, since India wanted to be the voice of the global South, it is the digital public infrastructure that can completely transform the economy of a country. And there is an accepted need for investing more in digital public infrastructure. And I think the declaration talks of a One Future alliance. The fact that India can set an example, the World Bank report, which was released a day before the G20 summit, talks of India doing in 6 years what it would have otherwise taken 50 years. So I think these are the concrete achievements of this declaration. I know there has been an undue emphasis on Ukraine. The real value of this declaration lies in the fact that it is a substantive proof of India becoming the voice of the global South, and India really trying to share technology. Whatever you do in India can be easily replicated in lower income countries. And the fact that African Union has also been accepted as a member of the G20, actually, that is the box that I would like to focus on. That almost every other paragraph, that is not Ukraine, the rest of it goes towards strengthening India's claim as the voice of the global South.
Indeed, Dr. Mohan Kumar, so if we focus on that, then when we talk, largely about geopolitics, we see that there is the North-South divide, or even in geoeconomics, and then there is the East-West divide. So in this context, how are these divides actually bridged to some extent by those 200+ meetings that India had as the president of G20, and what do you see, in terms of the outcome document or the Delhi Declaration, clarifying that sort of the bridge that India has become?
No, I think you are right. India has also set one of its objectives as being the bridge between the North and the South. I think what India tried to do is not to take an antagonistic anti-Western position and merely trying to convey the priorities and interests of the global South in a convincing manner to the countries of the North. And after all, our relationship with the United States has been important. And I want to make this point to your viewers that bilateral relationships do make a difference. when it comes to multilateral meetings. The fact that Joe Biden came one day earlier, the fact that the Prime Minister had a separate dinner meeting with Joe Biden, you are trying to get US on board on the paragraph on Ukraine. The paragraph on Ukraine just didn't happen overnight. Obviously, some issues were handled by the Prime Minister, some issues were handled by the External Affairs Minister, some other issues would have been handled by the Sherpa. So your bilateral relations, whether it is United States, EU, or the West, makes a big difference because you use the political capital in your bilateral relationship to get an outcome in a multilateral meeting which serves your interest. I think that is what India has done brilliantly. But as one observer said, let's be honest and frank. I think it's also India's moment in many ways in the world today. You know, we are the flavor of the season, if you like. Everybody seems to think that here is a country which doesn't covet other people's territory. Here is a country which is a democracy. And here is a country which actually is the fastest growing economy. There is so much promise that India holds that a lot of countries, democracies and other countries which are looking to India. And I think we also have good relations with Russia and some other countries. So the fact that India was able to leverage its bilateral ties to get a multilateral outcome, which is brilliant, I think that should not be underestimated. It's not just that we are gathered together among 20 countries and suddenly you start working with everybody. You have to use your political capital, which I thought the External Affairs Minister and others have done brilliantly, because without that, it would not have been possible. If I may add, all the negotiations I did in Geneva, we normally stop the clock, which means you go to the last day and then you stop the clock and say, we have not been able to achieve, but we will continue. This is the exact opposite. It seems to me you will have to find some fun things for the heads of state and heads of government to do tomorrow, send them off to Taj or Jaipur or something, because all of the work is over and I don't know what they're going to do tomorrow in Bharat Mandapam. So I think it's a fantastic moment for India's Prime Minister, Indian government and India's diplomacy, and therefore for the Indian people.
Indeed, Ambassador Kumar, just so our viewers know, there's a third session that will take place tomorrow morning on One Future as well. So that's still to come on the G20 the summit. But since we've spoken about the African Union membership, Ambassador Kumar, we've spoken about the Ukraine-Russia conflict and the Global Biofuel Alliance. Another important tangible outcome from the G20 summit, or the margins of it, is the the India, US, UAE, Saudi Arabia partnership for global infrastructure and investment, which speaks about an India, West Asia, Europe economic corridor. You've served in Bahrain. How do you look at this new connectivity project, which aims to foster trade between these 2 or 3 regions of the world, especially given the fact that it has enormous geopolitical implications for the region and beyond?
No, Ramesh, I think that's huge. I'm glad you raised this question, because this was a little noticed affair. It was a side event to the declaration. So obviously it doesn't find mention in the declaration. But I cannot overemphasize the importance of this partnership for global infrastructure. It brings together India, the countries of the Gulf and the Middle East, Europe, and United States. No prizes for guessing who has been left out. No prizes for guessing what it aims to counter. I think we have cried ourselves hoarse in India to talk about infrastructure that will be financially viable, that will be environmentally sustainable, and that will meet the aspirations. So we have in the quadrilateral security dialogue established certain principles for infrastructure, for top quality infrastructure. And therefore, this is the first practical step that I have seen from these countries. You can talk of principles. Ultimately, you need actually people to put that principle into practice. If you see the 4 partners who have got together, the Gulf and the Middle Eastern countries have the money, the location, the strategic location, and are very, very good at logistics. Need I say Dubai and Bahrain? So they are very good at that. India is very good at appropriate technology, providing engineers, manpower, etc. And the US can rightly provide the latest state-of-the-art technology, and the US and Europe are actually the destinations. Ultimately, connectivity and infrastructure has to go towards the destination where goods and services finally go. I think that is what this infrastructure aims to bridge. That is, you have a corridor right from India up to Europe through the Middle East and Gulf. I think that's a very, very, sure. I would say it's a game changer, frankly, from all perspectives.
Ambassador Mohan Kumar, when we talk about infrastructure, the thing that comes to mind is about finance. And well, the G20 in the declaration has talked about, you know, bigger and stronger multilateral development banks. Also, the fund is going to increase by around $200 billion to support, you know, debt restructuring and stuff like that. How do you look at the financial, you know, changes that are taking place so that infrastructure can be supported also from wherever it comes, the income, the money, and the supply side can be pushed so that movement of goods, supply chains and everything would develop, including into markets like Africa, which are ready to develop?
So on finance, Mark, my view is that things have come full circle. There was a time when there was only World Bank and IMF. Then you had other agencies. Then you had the Belt and Road Initiative and China's new...
All right, apologies to you, Ambassador Kumar. We're getting these latest visuals of the gala dinner planned for all G20 leaders and their delegations, which we are getting to you the latest visuals from the venue of that gala dinner. Remember, this is a culmination of day one of the summit, starting with the leaders' arrival this morning, followed by two sessions, one in the afternoon and another before that in the morning, followed by a couple of side events as well. We are standing by for the arrival of the leaders from all G20 member countries and the special invitees as well to a gala dinner.
Clearly lit up so beautifully with different colors. President of India, Draupadi Murmu, who is hosting this gala dinner, has arrived. And we will continue to get you visuals, quite mesmerizing visuals as we can see, the features of the Bharat Mandapam in full display. There are 170 guests that are on the list of this special gala dinner hosted by President Draupadi Murmu. And apart from the foreign leaders and heads of delegates, chief ministers of all states, cabinet ministers, state ministers, secretaries and of the central government, distinguished guests are all invited.
Indeed, if you're just tuning in, we are getting to you the latest visuals from Bharat Mandapam, the venue of the 18th G20 summit, where the President of India, Ms. Draupadi Murmu, has arrived to host the G20 leaders for a gala dinner towards the end of day one of the two-day G20 summit in New Delhi.
Of course, the G20 consists of Australia, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, going in the alphabetical order, that is China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, the UK, the US, the European Union, and now the African Union. So that's 21 members of the G20 plus, or should we call it the G21?
Indeed, and as Mark just said, a total of 170 guests are on the list of special invitees to the G20 dinner to be hosted by President Draupadi Murmu of India in the national capital. Apart from foreign leaders and heads of delegates, chief ministers of all the states, cabinet and ministers of state, secretaries in the central government, and other distinguished guests have been invited to the gala dinner at Bharat Mandapam. You just saw the President and the Prime Minister in waiting to receive the leaders as they walk in. Just to give you a sense of what to expect over the next few minutes, the arrivals would begin with the leaders of the international organizations, followed by the special guests.
Well, we'll continue to return to those visuals as and when we get them. But going back to the story on the global infrastructure investment and India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor program in New Delhi, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, she said that the EU-India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor is historic and it will directly connect India. It will enhance trade 40%. It will make it faster by 40%.
India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. This is nothing but historic. It will be the most direct connection to date between India, the Arabian Gulf, and Europe, with a rail link that will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster. This corridor is much more than just a railway or
the venue of the G20 summit, and we are waiting for the G20 leaders to arrive, Mark, for a gala dinner.
But right now we can see that the colors are quite spectacular in the Indian tricolor. Colors of saffron, white and green, blue. Beautiful colors that are changing, and the fountains. Truly, this has been transformative in a sense, this Bharat Mandapam. It's the first time that any event is being held there of this kind and sets a precedent for future events. And it's also a good way to culminate 200 plus meetings of India's presidency, all of which had highlighted India's soft power. So here once again, we are witness to that.
Indeed, and just to give you, the viewers, a sneak peek of what to expect over the next few minutes, we are waiting, standing by for the leaders to arrive in a certain order of precedence. First would be the leaders of the international organizations and the 8 other special invitees.
Well, going back to that story on the infrastructure corridor, the President of the European Commission also said that the Trans-Africa Corridor, and which is the second project, is in fact, which was launched today, it's going to connect all landlocked nations with the sea.
The Trans-African Corridor, which will connect the port of Lobito in Angola with the Katanga province in DRC and the Copper Belt in Zambia. Our goal is not only to connect a landlocked region to the sea. Our partnership will also invest in local value chains, in clean energy, and in skills for the local workforce.
In fact, the Saudi Crown Prince said that this economic corridor is cooperation with the United States and Saudi Arabia, and it will be $20 billion. And he thanked member nations who are part of the launch.
Commend the PGII launched by President Biden with the participation of Saudi Arabia in $20 billion. We look forward to the integration of the initiative and the Economic Corridor project, which is announced in this meeting. I would like to thank those who worked with us to reach this founding step to establish this important economic corridor. My best regard to you all.
Japan has supported India's views on the Indo-Pacific, particularly in the South China Sea. This was borne out in the bilateral meeting that took place between the leaders of the two countries, in this case India and Japan, Prime Ministers Narendra Modi and Kishida Fumio.
Indeed, Vishal Barristo has spoken to the diplomat in the Japanese Prime Minister's office, and this is about the India-Japan. He said that they are very solid economic partners with strong historic connect, and PM Modi's Look East, Act East policy has made a difference. Let's listen to that now.
When it comes to friendship, India and Japan have a historic connect. I have with me Mr. Shikata. He is a diplomat in the Prime Minister's Office of Japan. Let's talk to him and find out about India, Japan and G20. India and Japan are also going to sign a bilateral. So what can we expect out of it?
Well, of course, India-Japan relations have been very positive. We are deepening our cooperation between the two countries in such areas as economic, political and cultural areas. So one good positive news is the high-speed rail project, which is making progress between Mumbai and Ahmedabad. And we are looking forward to expanding our cooperation, for example, in northeastern India, connecting with Bangladesh.
When we talk about India and Japan relations, what kind of changes have you seen ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi took over the reins of the country in 2014?
Of course, Prime Minister Modi has been very proactive in promoting cooperation between India and Japan. And then late Prime Minister Abe responded in supporting India's economic development with a high-speed rail project or the subway projects like a Delhi Metro.
How do you see the role of India both in ASEAN and also in G20?
I mentioned this connectivity between India and Bangladesh. Of course, toward the future, there could be, based on Prime Minister Modi's Act East, there would be free and open Indo-Pacific collaboration to be promoted by Japan and India together. And this would be leading to more prosperous region across Indo-Pacific oceans.
You hear the Japanese diplomat, he says that both India and Japan can do a lot more for the world, but especially India that has been raising voice of the global south and also voice of the developing countries, and there has to be a rule of law. Without that, world will never be one earth, one family, one future. With cameraman Rahul in Delhi, this is Vishal Barristo.